The trip went really well. I spent some time in Kabul, in Jalalabad, in Bagram, and most of it in Kunar province, where I was embedded with 10th Mountain Division, and a great learning experience. We were right on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. It's a combat outpost out there called Penich, and this is actually the second tour for the battalion that is in this area. I was on a combat outpost that shared a latrine with 45 men. Like I said, an experience in and of itself. It was a beautiful place to sleep under the stars, but God bless those guys, they need some running water soon. When I first arrived there, I was at Task Force Chosen, and where they're based, they arrived, 10th Mountain arrived in January, and they're keeping, a tally on the wall of how many mortars they've received, and they were at 30 thus far, which is, if those of you who have been deployed, who have been in war zones like Iraq or Afghanistan, you know that if you're getting hit constantly like that, it can be very debilitating. Before I came, they actually did an operation called Rocket Man, which I thought was great, and they went up into the mountains where Taliban and Al-Qaeda elements can come across the border, and this is a place where their launch sites and where their weapons caches are, and they actually destroyed a lot of those. So the last hit they got was a few days before I arrived, and then they did this operation. So luckily no mortars while I was there. Task Force Chosen, particularly the guys who are at Camp Penich, their sole mission out there is border interdiction. So what you find is where I was stationed, we're about 12 kilometers south of the Korangal, and I know most of your readers are paying attention to this stuff, and the Korangal right now is probably the most kinetic area of operation. This section of RC East is what I was told by commanders is kind of the heart of the insurgency. The military now has counterinsurgency on PowerPoint. So as a media embed, when you go over, you meet with the PAOs and they give you the PowerPoint presentation. And so I was like, all right, good. Well, at least COIN is filtered down to where it's now on the PowerPoint. That's a good sign. But what I want to know is, are you really doing COIN? And can you do COIN in an area that's so rural? Unlike Iraq, where the population centers are large cities, can you do this in such a sprawl area, particularly because the enemy can find places to hide and to have sanctuary. And I think they are trying, and I think it's going to be an interesting battle to watch, especially over the coming year. But the signs that I thought were encouraging as far as tactics, locally, these guys at Camp Penich had, like I said, no running water, using latrines, yet one of their first construction builds was to build a shura on their compound because they wanted to bring the locals in. They understand the importance of really drinking chai and drinking tea with them. So that was one of the first builds, and I was really impressed to see that Captain Harrison, who's in his second tour, that was one of his main priorities. They also have done, for Afghan Independence Day and for Eid and other holidays, they're throwing parties on the base. I didn't realize this until I went over. I thought soccer or European football would be what they all love, and it's actually volleyball. So they put a volleyball net up, just to have parties and celebrations with these guys. So and they're being thoughtful. It's not just the officers; it's the enlisted guys who are learning Pashto and picking up local customs. So we can talk about, of course, the kinetic things that happen, but what I was really impressed with is that the personal outreach and touch that these soldiers were giving in the area, because we've heard the phrase hearts and mind. It's kind of a throwback phrase from counterinsurgency in the 70s, but really it applies here, and these guys are making an effort to win the hearts of the locals. One thing that I was actually somewhat discouraged about is the intel assets that we have, or at least that I was privy to. In Iraq, I think we all saw a million flowcharts, and here's the million different umbrella and sub-insurgent groups that were going on in Iraq. You had special groups with the Shia, Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, Ba'athist. And I didn't see that breakdown. I was discouraged on our lack of intelligence when it comes to the enemy, because I asked, I said, listen, we've got HIG, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, TNSM operating over the border. We've got all these insurgent groups. So when these guys are coming across the border and you are able to interdict them, who are they with? What are their motivations? And what I was told by one major is that, well, we're not as much concerned with, are they, Taliban, are they Lesh, what are they, HIG, you know, what we just label them all as anti-Afghan forces, anti-coalition forces. And, you know, I think on some level that's a mistake. I will say I think the guys are doing the best with what they have, but Brookings Institute and Fred and Kim Kagan have both called for a 3-star command headquarters in Afghanistan, and I think that's necessary. I think we need to have a much better idea of who the enemy is and who we're fighting, and to know their motivations. I really think that's key to winning this battle. And you know, for the first time in 7 years, we're going to have the resources and the funding and the troops to get this right. So if you know anyone's listening, get a 3-star a 3-star planning headquarters out there ASAP. I think that would certainly be beneficial. Believe it or not, the Japanese are doing an incredible job with their NGOs. I think the most frustrating thing I saw, and you know, this is a conflict that we're always going to have with development groups, is the lack of people not leaving the FOB. You know, you get the PRTs do a good job, but you have a real problem when you've got you know, groups whose motto is, you know, no deaths, no KIAs whatsoever. So they're kind of afraid to take risk and go out and meet the locals. I went into downtown Jalalabad with no soldiers, no body armor, nothing but a hijab and a video camera, and you know, I was safe. Now I was with someone who obviously had a weapon, and you know, Tim Lynch from Free Range International, he had an interpreter, knows the population well. But I think you know, I think the military is doing an incredible job with gaining hearts and minds, but you're talking about people who have no running water, who don't have electricity in many locations. If you pull up and you know, 6 MRAP convoy or a 6 MRAP patrol and everyone's carrying M4s, I mean, an MRAP might as well be a spaceship to these people, you know what I mean? So if you are in an NGO, or if you are with state, or you are with USAID, or any of these other groups that are working out in there, security will always be an issue, but there are areas where you can go out and meet with the population, and I think people are trying, but I'd like to see more of that. And on my way back in yesterday, I was told that Obama just announced more positions for civilian surge, so I think that'll help. But in addition, it's the point of actually getting out and meeting with the locals is to fix things the way Afghans do it, to do it Afghani style is the phrase I've heard often. Because if we try to impose an American solution or a Western solution on this, it's just not going to happen, and we're going to get the same, you know, we're going to get the same beating that the Russians did. And to not lose this thing, we have to make sure we understand the population, and our solutions actually empower them to have their own stable and sustaining form of government, and not something that, you know, makes Westerners happy.